side event today. I'm really delighted to welcome you on behalf of the coordinators of the Dialogue on Plastic Pollution and my organization, TESS, the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs. We're delighted to co-host today with the government of Barbados and also of Ecuador. So our event today is on plastic pollution and transparency in trade flows in the context of MEAs and the protection of environment and health. I'm really delighted that we can open today with remarks from each of the co-host countries, from Ambassador Valencia of Ecuador and Ambassador Wilson of Barbados. So I will go directly to offer them the opportunity to provide welcome remarks. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you, Caroline. Excellencies, dear colleagues, friends, welcome and thank you for joining us at this side event on plastic pollution and transparency in trade flows, held in the margins of the BRS COP. Ecuador is pleased to co-host this conversation alongside Barbados and TESS. It's an absolute pleasure to offer a few opening remarks today, together with Ambassador Matthew Wilson and Caroline Birbeck. Plastic pollution is a global challenge that touches every corner of our planet, and we need global cooperation to address it. Trade is one of the main ways our societies connect with goods, services, ideas, innovation, and culture flowing between us. Trade can be part of the solution when it comes to fighting plastic pollution. Transparency plays a central role in this. In trade and beyond, it builds trust, encourages accountability, and helps bring hidden problems to light. Having clear information about how plastic moves across borders supports better policy, stronger environmental protection, and healthier communities. Let me give a concrete example. Under the Minamata Convention on Mercury, having data about trade in products that contain mercury helps countries to take steps to protect human health and the environment. The same is true for plastics. When we know more about the trade in single-use plastics or products that contain harmful chemicals, for example, we're better equipped to take meaningful action. This is where trade has something, perhaps a lot, to offer. With greater transparency, we can spot trends, flag risks, and ones that protect not only our economies, but also our ecosystems and public health. This conversation also occurs at a critical moment as the international community works toward a new plastic treaty. It is a chance to shape a global framework that reflects the problem's scale and the diversity of tools we have to address it, including trade. Let me say a few words about the Dialogue on Plastic Pollution and Environmentally Sustainable Plastics Trade, or the DPP. Ecuador is proud to be one of the 6 co-coordinators of this initiative at the WTO, together with Australia, Barbados, China, Fiji, and Morocco. Since 2020, we've been working to explore how trade policy can support efforts at all levels, national, regional, and global, to reduce plastic pollution and promote more sustainable plastic trade. The dialogue is one of the WTO's environmental initiatives. Today, it brings together 83 members, around half of the WTO's membership. Those members account for nearly 90% of the global plastics trade, which shows the significance of our work. From the beginning, we share a common belief that trade should be part of the solution. The dialogue has focused its work on 3 pillars. First, reducing harmful and unnecessary plastics, including single-use plastics and packaging. Second, promoting trade in alternatives and substitutes that are safer and more sustainable. And third, addressing cross-cutting issues, including cooperation, technical assistance, and, very relevant today, transparency. At the WTO Ministerial Conference in Abu Dhabi last March, the dialogue released a new ministerial statement. That document highlights the importance of transparency in several ways as a shared principle, an area of practical action, and a means to support better monitoring of trade flows throughout the plastic value chain. Actually, the ministerial conference was in March last year, not last March. Since then, we've continued to work in this area, working not just within the WTO, but also in collaboration with other international partners. That's why today's event matters. It's part of a broader effort to keep building bridges, sharing knowledge, and moving forward together. Let me end on a personal note. A friend recently wrote a book about one of his ancestors, someone who lived through hardship, but also with joy and resilience. In his book, he reflects on how we often think about our parents or grandparents, but forget 2,000 of lives that came before them, lives that made our existence possible. He estimated that each one of us has more than 2,000 ancestors in the last 300 years. So why do I bring this up? Because our generation, those born in the second half of the 20th century and beyond, are the first to live fully in an age of plastics. Yes, plastics brought benefits, but the pollution and environmental damage that follow it have grown beyond control. And unless we act, we'll only get worse. We owe it to future generations and to those who came before to take more peaceful and more in harmony with nature. Thank you for your attention, and now I'm happy to pass the floor to Ambassador Matthew Wilson, my colleague from Barbados. Matthew, thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador, for being a great co-pilot with me on this. Mr. Plastic Fantastic. When I was a kid growing up in Barbados, there was a dog in the neighborhood nicknamed Mr. Plastic Fantastic because he always seemed to bounce back from everything. A little neighborhood fight here, a little hit on the tail there. Mr. Plastic Fantastic always seemed to bounce right back up like plastic. And these were the days when plastic was the answer to all of our troubles. Storage issues, we have plastic. Supermarket groceries, we have plastic. What to pack for school lunches, we have plastic. Thirsty in the hot Barbados sun, we have plastic water bottles. And it's true that plastic has been, in many cases, a literal lifesaver. We just have to look at the medical industry to know this. But today we know the darker side of single-use plastics. Clogged waterways, strangled turtles, destroyed natural habitats, and more recently, the impact of microplastics on our health. Now, the trade dimension of all of this was not immediate a few years ago. And the dialogue on plastics pollution at the WTO, in partnership with a host of collaborations like TESS, has done a commendable job in placing this issue onto the global agenda. Now, trade in plastics were at a record $1.2 trillion in 2022, and if left unabated, this will triple in 2060, with the largest impact expected to be in developing countries like my own. Now, as a small vulnerable economy and a small island developing state, Barbados feels the impact of this onslaught of plastic waste, which can take between 20 to more than 500 years to degrade in the environment. Even biodegradable plastics are a second best option. They degrade only under very specific conditions influenced by factors such as the type of bioplastics and the presence of the right microorganisms that fast track degradation. And plastics pollution has a large impact on the blue economy, from coral reefs to fisheries to tourism. It has an impact on human and animal health. A few weeks ago, I visited the Barbados Sea Turtle Project, which has the mission to recover marine turtle populations through the use of science and education. And part of their mission is to raise awareness of the devastating impact of plastic waste on these magnificent animals. The stories and the photos are heart-wrenching. Plastic bottle caps and plastic bags so deeply embedded in the body of these animals that their tissue starts to grow around it. Baby sea turtles taking their first walk into the ocean cruelly stopped short by a plastic pet bottle ring around their neck. Now, I want these images to be shocking because sometimes clogged gutters may not do the job of convincing. But maybe you're not an animal lover. I don't know who is not an animal lover, but maybe some of you aren't. Maybe you're a people lover. So what about this? Now, a recent study that collected tissue samples from around 300 recently deceased organ donors found 5 times more accumulated plastics in brain tissue than in liver and kidney tissue, where you would expect to find microplastics. And that if you were to accumulate all of these tiny flecks of nanoplastics in the brain of one of these subjects, you will have a sandwich bag's worth of plastics in somebody's brain. And apparently we ingest bits of plastic daily through household dust or fumes, sometimes through certain cosmetics or skincare products as well. And apparently those of us who drink from plastic bottles ingest an extra 90,000 particles of microplastics a year, compared to 4,000, which those of us who just drink from the tap. And also, and this is was a little surprising for someone who does not cook, microwaving food in plastic containers can create billions of microplastics in just seconds. Now, I know research is ongoing on the impact of microplastics on human health, but do we really want to become human, Mr. Plastic Fantastics? So what can we do from a trade perspective? Now, the development and use of sustainable and safer alternatives and affordable non-plastic substitutes, transparency, data, research, development, these are essential to reducing plastic pollution and waste and for promoting sustainable plastics use. Now, one of the areas of our work in the DPP has been identifying safe and effective non-plastic substitutes and alternatives. And some of these alternatives can come from the same ocean being overrun by plastic waste, like this, olive oil in seaweed. This is actually seaweed. And this is courtesy of Not Pla out of the UK. Now, from the Barbados perspective, can you imagine rum being in this? Yeah. Now, SIDS and coastal states, we have a large maritime footprint, and these coastal ecosystems are viable, untapped sources for exports of marine-based non-plastic substitutes and alternatives. The paradox is that the export share for these SIDS in these products is 0.05%. Why? Tariffs and non-tariff measures, including environmental, health, and safety requirements, can impede access for marine-based non-plastic substitutes and alternatives, particularly in developing countries. Now, measures that protect human health are critical. I'm not trying to undermine that, but they must not be counterproductive in providing healthier, more environmentally sustainable alternatives to populations. So we have to continue to examine these measures to ensure balance between being fit for purpose and being welcome to competition and healthy alternatives. Now, in instances where health rules for edible products also apply to non-food materials used in packaging, for example, seaweed, SBS compliance may be a very, very costly endeavor. And that's also something that we need to look at. Now, in the DPP, we've also been collaborating with ISO, International Organization for Standardization, about potential efforts to map existing standards for alternatives. And this will be extremely helpful in providing additional transparency and really engendering a real discussion on this issue. Now, SIDS and developing countries. if we are to really diversify towards non-plastic substitutes and alternatives, there are a few things that we need. We need to collectively develop the enabling environment for trade and marine-based non-plastic substitutes and alternatives, including the development of regulatory and legal frameworks, business facilitation mechanisms, harmonization of standards, as I mentioned, and the removal of trade restrictive non-tariff barriers, in addition to the investment and upskilling that will be necessary in our economies. We need access to a body of research and data on non-plastic substitutes and alternatives, because as we know, the most sustainable decisions are based on evidence and data. Hence, we have to do the work. Third, we need the appropriate technical assistance and capacity building for our small businesses in SIDS and developing countries, including from UN Trade and Development, ITC, BRS Secretariat, and more. And I know that many funders are scaling back on their ODA. But I urge you, funders, to see ODA as part of the investment in creating alternatives to the mass consumption of single-use plastic, which is literally choking our world. And finally, we need to ensure access to the supply chains of marine-based non-plastic substitutes and alternatives. This means a role for businesses and lead firms in their sourcing decisions, in where they choose to invest, and how they want to partner with small businesses in developing countries who are doing innovative work in plastic alternatives. Now, we cannot overstate the importance of transparency on trade flows. In the DPP, the World Customs Organization has already started discussing how to better identify plastics embedded in traded goods, single-use plastics and other goods, to improve international cooperation on the classifications of plastics and plastic products in the context of the ongoing 2027 review of the harmonized system. You know, I loved Mr. Plastic Fantastic when I was a kid. I suspect that he would not have been taken kindly to being called Mr. Seaweed Plastic Substitute Fantastic or Mr. Single-Use Plastic Not Fantastic. But now in 2025, we need to think along these lines and take some of the hard decisions which may temporarily inconvenience us while preserving for generations to come. If that is our burden, then we have an obligation to take it up. So thank you very much. I'm now very happy to hand the floor over to my dear friend Carolyn, Executive Director of the Forum on Trade, Environment and the SDGs, who will serve as moderator for the technical panel. Carolyn, thank you.
Excellencies, I just wanted to start by thanking you both for such inspiring opening remarks and also for your leadership on these topics. It's really a privilege to be part of this panel today with both of you, particularly given the strong work you're doing at the WTO on these issues and also beyond in a range of different UN processes. So thank you so much. Also welcome to the audience and those who are also watching online. So Ambassador Valencia and Ambassador Wilson have highlighted some of the key aspects of the work of the dialogue on plastic pollution, and I think importantly in the engagement of such a broad diversity of members of the WTO in these discussions. If you look at that list of the 83 members, it's really impressive to see the diversity. So I would encourage you all to look at that. Here, of course, today we want to build on some of the work that has been highlighted in the DPP in regard to promoting a more complete and granular picture of trade across the life cycle of plastics. As they noted, we will require international cooperation in order to address some of the gaps in trade data and to see what other mechanisms can be used to enhance transparency. So this event today provides a great opportunity to explore more about the relevance of the World Customs Organization, the harmonized system, in particular to supporting the transparency that's needed to implement MEAs, such as the BRS and the Future Plastics Treaty, and also to learn about some of the existing experiences we have, in particular from our colleagues at the BRS. So I've been asked to provide just a brief introduction. I want to move quickly to the panelists. But for those who are not familiar, you may be saying, who or what is the WCO and what is the HS? So in 2 sentences, the World Customs Organization is based in Brussels. It's an international organization that among other functions it serves as the custodian of what's called the Harmonized Commodities Description and Coding System. Very technical, but hugely important. It's known in short as the harmonized system. At the international level, it provides the framework for the collection of trade data. It provides the classification of products that provide the basis for the collection of trade data around the world. That's just an introduction. We'll hear more about that, but I didn't want to get past the first few minutes without clarifying what the HS is. So second, in seeking to boost transparency of trade flows in plastics, we're not starting from scratch. There have been a range of efforts in different MEAs and different international processes to improve transparency of trade flows. Exchanges in the DPP have already enabled the identification of a number of proposals for HS amendments, which are under discussion currently. We'll hear more about that later. Alongside, the BRS Secretariat, at the request of its members, has advanced proposals for amending the HS in regard to particular chemicals and to plastic wastes. We know that a number of other MEAs provide insights on ways in which they have tried to promote transparency and traceability, and there have been prior HS amendments to support implementation of MEAs and other international agreements. So we also know that UNCTAD, building on what Ambassador Wilson said, UNCTAD has conducted efforts to help map and identify gaps in the HS codes for non-plastic substitutes. And we know in the context of the Plastics Treaty negotiations, a broad range of members have highlighted the importance of transparency in regard to trade flows across the life cycle of plastics. So the third point, so that's to say this is not a new issue. There's a great deal that we can build on, a huge amount of expertise. It's relevant to the BRS discussions that you're having this week. It's also centrally relevant to the implementation of the Plastics Treaty going forward. A third key point is that this was mentioned by Ecuador and Barbados, that trade occurs at all stages of the plastics life cycle in large volumes. So we have over $1.2 trillion of trade in plastics per year. All countries are engaged in trade in plastics, either as producers or consumers. And given this significant role of trade in the global plastics economy, international cooperation that spurs and guides the transformation of supply chains will be critically important, as will cooperation for countries to adopt common measures to control or restrict trade in certain products as part of that effort towards transformation, toward greater sustainability. So fourth, while we know that improving transparency in trade flows of plastics is essential for the informed design and implementation of trade policies and MEAs on plastics and plastic pollution, we know that we currently don't have the information we need. And we don't have enough of the right kinds of HS codes and transparency mechanisms to enable us to accurately track trade flows in plastics. This is partly because plastics are everywhere. They're in so many products that are traded internationally. It's very difficult to track all of those. And particularly, we can't necessarily provide a complete picture. And on the other hand, we also can't provide an adequately granular picture that we need. So we'll hear more detail in this event on the range of data gaps at hand, proposals to boost transparency, both through amendments to the HS and through other tools that are available, including international cooperation on standards, definitions, technological tools, and so on. So I hope just those 4 points provide a little bit of contextualization of what we're here to discuss today. So I'm now delighted to move to our technical panel discussion, where we'll learn more about all of this. I'm delighted that we have with us Melissa Lim, who's a program officer at the BRS Secretariat, Gail Gruby, who's acting director of tariff and trade affairs at the World Customs Organization, followed by my colleague Simon Ardila from TESS, And then we have Carla Valle-Catlan, who is Program Management Officer at the BRS Secretariat. So thank you again all for taking the time to join us. We've allocated about 7 minutes to each of the speakers, and then I'm hoping we'll have time for questions and discussion with those of you here today. So first, over to you, Melissa.
Thank you, Caroline, and for also organizing this very important event. It's an example of the collaboration that we have here in Geneva and beyond with the World Customs Organization, with the WTO and TESS. As has been mentioned, trade is a very important issue for the implementation of the Basel, Rotterdam, and Stockholm Convention. For those of you who have followed any of the discussion going on this week, it has arisen in many occasions, and it is not surprising because no country can independently produce any of all its chemicals that it uses, nor can it treat all its waste. So trade of chemicals and wastes is something that happens all the times. And for a comprehensive management of the impacts of these goods, then you need to understand what's happening to your chemicals and your waste. So as you know, the three conventions are at its heart, as their heart, especially the Basel and Rotterdam Convention trade instruments. The Basel Convention deals with transboundary movement of hazardous waste and has at its heart a prior informed consent procedure. The same for the Rotterdam Convention, which deals with some of the chemicals that some countries consider need attention, and has also at its heart a prior informed consent procedure. And the Stockholm Convention on POPs also has some strong trade-related provisions. Now, we've heard about the need for information exchange and for data, but what this means also is that if you want to understand what's happening to your waste and to your chemicals, what you need, and delegates at this meeting will know this very well, you need a common language. Here, it's always about English and how, if we don't have translation, it's difficult to have good negotiations. But to understand trade, then you need a common language. And there is a convention that has worked on devising this common language. Caroline has referred to it earlier on. And it's the convention that underpins the harmonized commodity and description coding system, which is the HS. Gail here will tell you much more about it after myself, but I want to highlight a few points which I think our delegates here tend to not be aware of, and that's very important if you want to amend the harmonized system in any way, is that it's a very powerful tool. It's used by 200 economies worldwide, but it is a legal instrument. And that means that to change it, it takes time because, as you will all know from following the discussions here, especially on the review of annexes under the Basel Convention that's ongoing now, legal instruments have to be implemented worldwide and countries need to get prepared for them, and there are massive implications. So here in the convention, we sometimes get requests from parties to just add a code here or change this to make changes. But it's not so simple because what they are effectively asking is to change a legal instrument. So I'll then now tell you about some of our experience in the BRS conventions in doing this. But let me first highlight how powerful this tool is. This is a compilation of information on the transboundary movement of plastic waste that we developed recently under the Plastic Waste Partnership under the Basel Convention. And because of the HS Convention, the data on trade in plastic waste as encoded in the TESS is made publicly available, and that then allows the flows to be understood. So this is available on our website in case you're interested. And the HS codes are useful in many ways for the implementation of the BRS Convention. You can also, I'm sure, intuit that for the identification of chemicals. For example, it's much easier for people to understand a code, a specific code, than to understand what is hexabromocyclododecane or perfluorosulfonic acid, all these very complicated terms that you have under the Chemicals Convention. And then there's uses in monitoring, enforcement, and as we've heard, data collection. So because of the importance of the harmonized system for the implementation of the BRS Convention, we have a very long and successful cooperation with the World Customs Organization in obtaining harmonized system codes for chemicals and waste listed under the BRS. For Rotterdam Convention chemicals, this is embedded in Article 13 of the Convention, so codes are necessary. And movement documents, when chemicals are exported, should bear those codes. And we've been able to obtain codes for most of chemicals listed under the Rotterdam Convention. And since these are also more or less the same chemicals listed under the Stockholm Convention, it means that we have codes, specific codes for most of these chemicals. With the Basel Convention, the cooperation has been established since COP2, so for a very long time. And the most recent work stems from decision BC-14/9. And this work has also been quite successful. So there were 13 waste types listed for which codes were requested by parties. And out of the higher priority ones, you can see on the list, we have codes already in the current version of the harmonized systems for electronic and electrical waste, which is, of course, a waste stream of high importance for the Basel Convention, and lead acid batteries, which also is now under discussions at this meeting in terms of environmentally sound management. And from the current review cycle of the harmonized system, we have a good chance of obtaining codes for plastic waste, PCB oils, and waste pneumatic tires. All waste streams, of course, of high importance and under discussion at this COP. So this has been quite successful, but we do encounter some, let's say, more difficulties than when it comes to discussing and obtaining codes for chemicals. And these are a few lessons learned from this work, which I think in the future for the treaty or any other convention is important to point out. One reason why it's so easy, is relatively easy to obtain codes for chemicals, is because chemicals are described in a universal language that's agreed upon, in the scientific community. So, and that's highly compatible with the harmonized system, which is also itself a classification system with a very defined nomenclature. When it comes to waste, this is a different story, right? So what I'm showing, trying to convey in this slide here is that waste definitions are much more complicated and the interpretation varies across boundaries. So there's many aspects to be taken into account into defining a hazardous waste or hazardous waste stream. Plus, under the Basel Convention, national interpretation also matters. And therefore, that creates some differences with how commodities are represented in the harmonized systems, which means it takes much more time for us to obtain codes for Basel Convention waste. And coming back to plastics, there's also a concern, as you all know, to understand or maybe take action on chemicals that are embedded in plastics. And this is related to concerns under the Stockholm and Basel Convention to look at POPs that are found in articles and how to monitor their trade and their impact on importing countries. Now, we will be discussing this next week in the Stockholm Convention under the agenda item on illegal traffic, if any of you is interested in hearing the discussion. But this is going to be slightly more complicated to achieve because, as Gail might explain to you in more detail, the harmonized system classifies goods based on their characteristics and not necessarily on their content. So we might be starting work under the Stockholm Convention to explore how this could be done. So please watch out. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Melissa, for a really comprehensive review. And it's clear to everyone here that Melissa is really a go-to expert on the intersection between these two issues, which I think is critically important. So I'm now really delighted to turn over to our colleague, Gail Gruby, who traveled today from Brussels to be with us. So thank you for that effort. As she will tell you, greening the HS is a big priority now at the World Customs Organization. And I think with no further ado, I'll just turn straight over to you. Thank you, Gail.
Thank you very much. I'm not sure how much detail I can actually get into 7 minutes, but we'll see what we can do. Can we swap the slides, please? Just oops. Lovely, thank you. Okay, so as you now know, I'm with the World Customs Organization. So we're not just those people, customs, who stand at the airport and, you know, give you trouble when you're trying to travel. We actually are that thin blue line that protects countries at the border. And the WCO, we're quite an old organisation. We're established at the same time as the WTO, and we're established primarily to look after the classification system. So that's the HS that we've been talking about. And we are the voice for customs administrations globally. Now, Harmonised Commodity Description and Coding System, it's a mouthful, so please feel free to call it HS, we do. But what is it? What it actually does is it gives a tool for you to know what is coming into and going out of your countries. It's a customs tool, and it classifies every tradable good in the world. And it allows us to apply different border measures to different types of goods. So they might have different tariff rates, or they might have restrictions or permit requirements. It allows us to profile and target goods. So if we know that, for example, that these goods often have a problem, we might want to select goods in this particular classification for examination. It allows us to easily reference traded goods in other legislation. It's used in determining origin applicability. And of course, at the national level, it's extended to allow the application of tariffs and other classification-based indirect tax, and the application of the concessions from those tariffs. And of course, it's for the use of the collection of customs statistics, which underpin all trade statistics. Now, it's used in 212 countries, over 98% of trade. And as I said, statistics, taxes, and trade negotiations are what it's basically there for. Now, the HS itself does not apply duties. That's a national matter. When we talk about the HS, we're talking about the global classification system that underpins all the tariffs. So when you change the HS, you're not affecting tariffs. Tariffs move with goods. So if we shift goods about, make new breakouts, tariffs move with them. All right. Now, of course, customs classification data is essential to producing statistics on trade, because it forms part of the foundation data for almost all of your government policy. If you want to know about plastics, you really need to know what's happening in terms of where the plastics are moving, where they're being reduced, where the waste is going. That's why you want trade statistics. To give you a bit of an idea, as I said, we have just over 5,000 codes, and all goods, everything you can possibly think of that you could trade, and anything you haven't invented yet but that you're going to invent that you want to trade, can already be classified. And they're classified into headings, 4-digit numbers and title. So for example, currently, and we hope with negotiations with BRS and WCO members that this is going to change, but we have 3915, which is waste, pairings and scrap of plastic. And then under that you break out, and you can break out into smaller or larger degrees of specificity. Now, so if your global policy area relates to traded goods, you're probably going to want a new HS code. So we go to 6 digits, and your ideal to really know what's happening is to have a 6-digit code that says, this is for good X, this is my goods, and then I can see what's happening in them in trade. And a significant number of the HS provisions have not been created based on the value of trade. It's not a revenue matter. It's because they provide statistics or support for dealing with matters of governmental, social, or environmental performance. Because as I said, identification is powerful. If you can see it, you can do something about it. So what do I mean by specificity? Now, all products are classified in the HS, but some are invisible as individual product types. So if we'd have a very broad heading like other appliances, which falls under electromechanical domestic appliances with self-contained electric motor other than vacuum cleaners of headings 8508, and that's by far that's actually one of the shorter titles. It actually covers a wide range of products. So if you brushed your teeth with an electric toothbrusher this morning, if you dropped something down the waste disposal unit, if you have an air humidifier that was trying to make your life a little bit more comfortable, all of those goods come under that classification. So currently, under HS 2022, which is our current edition, if you want me to tell you how many electric toothbrushes are traded globally, I can't. Because they're there, they're classified, they're captured, but they're invisible as a specific trade flow because they don't have their own subheading. So when we give a particular type of product a specific HS code, what we're really saying is this is important. And it could be because of a high trade value. It could be because they're critical to developing economies. But it can also be because we want to control, restrict, or monitor these goods. And so for goods that fall under MEAs like the BRS Conventions, this is why we have them there, because there's a requirement to monitor, at least, and in some cases control or restrict. And if we have the subheading, that makes it very easy for customs to implement, to turn the negotiations from words into actions. So one thing I do need to say, though, is it provides support only. So we can make all the specific codes we want to a degree, but we still need the governments to actually use that information. So, for example, as said, we have codes for the chemicals of the Rotterdam Convention, but if a country is not signed up and doesn't really want to do anything, then that data is collected, but nothing actually happens in terms of monitoring the goods internationally and restrictions and controls. So it is support only. It doesn't act to force countries. So it needs to be done in line with negotiations to actually have governments use this information. Now, I was asked to give an example, and I chose the Montreal Protocol because it's one of the most successful MEA to date. And one of the reasons of this, of course, was that it leveraged trade regulation. The HS codes were made for Montreal Protocol and to give countries a simplified method of applying allowance systems, phase-outs and duties. And it worked. And of course, they used the banning of non-trade as well, which was a very effective way of getting people signing up. And we continue to work with the Montreal Protocol. We have an ongoing relationships with the MEAs. So for the current edition, HS 2022, we added new gases from the Kigali Amendment, and we closed a blind spot by adding more specific classifications for mixtures. So if you're working with the WCO and the customs administrations for HS codes, it is an ongoing relationship. And as I said, again, we don't compel. We just provide the support. So what does this mean for plastics? Well, two of the key issues for tackling trade in plastics in terms of HS codes are deciding on the definitions of what you want to target and then making the trade visible. And that's where the HS comes in. And can we do it? Of course we can. We can do it for actually probably a large percentage of the goods, but not all. There are three major problems that restrict what we can do as the HS. So it's not the be-all and end-all tool. It's not a panacea. It is a powerful tool, but it must be one of many. So we have three major problems. One is definition availability. WCO members can consider creating new HS provisions, but we need to know what goods should be covered. We need to be able to achieve international agreement because don't forget, we are talking with the HS with a convention. We have to get agreement from the members to change the convention. So we need to achieve international agreement on the definitions and the scope of what is to be covered. And it's got to be enforceable. The convention forms the basis for countries' customs tariff acts, their legislation. So it needs to be enforceable, and it needs to be enforceable at the border. So whatever is in there, it needs to be possible and practical for customs and trade to work with at the border. So it needs to be able to be done within the resources of customs administrations. And visibility in the goods. And it was mentioned before, there's a lot of goods that unfortunately are hidden plastic flows. They're within goods. They're used to pack goods. So we can make classifications, for example, for new packaging that's going to be used to package these goods. But once it's around the goods, it's classified with them. And to be honest, it would be almost impossible to separate that out because you'd need thousands of new codes. You'd triple or quadruple the size of the HS, and you'd need to change the underlying rules that govern classification. Likewise, it's a little bit difficult to ask people to know, for example, if a car has X percentage of plastics embedded. So there are some limits to what we can do and what we can do realistically. Now, I'll give an example. About 8-9 years ago now, we looked at making a provision for biodegradable plastic bags as it was requested by one of our members. And we failed. We failed miserably on that one. And why? Because there was no international agreement on the definition of biodegradable. The biodegradability characteristics of the different types of plastics were not clear, so we couldn't just say that all plastics of this type are biodegradable. And of course, these can be altered by additives. And we had no method of really testing it and forcing it. I mean, the only one we could find that everyone agreed would test it would be to bury it under controlled conditions for 6 months. But if you have cargo sitting on a wharf accruing huge fees for 6 months while they wait for us to test their plastic bags, it just does not work. So there are times when we cannot help. But as I said, we can do a lot, and we have done a lot for other MEAs. So we want to be a help, and we want to be active in this. The WCO members, our council, they have made green customs one of the 3 focal areas for the WCO. They made it the focal area for our last period of our strategic plan and for this forthcoming one. So this is a big priority for us to try and make it a more sustainable world, and it will be reflected in our mission and value statements. And we have also been working, as you know, with BRS, with the DPP, thank you, with TESS, to make changes for plastics. Now, unfortunately, I'm not really free to tell you what they are because I'm so excited and I so want to, but I can't because we haven't quite got past the final hurdle yet. So we've gone through the voting. We've got changes in our recommendation, but they still need to go through our member states. And it will not be fully adopted until the end of the year, until the end of December. So we'll publish during the first working week in January. But we have made some significant changes for plastics. It's just a starting point, but it is there. So look out for the recommendation in January. And what next? Well, HSC doesn't stop. The Harmonised System Committee doesn't stop its work, as nor does the Review Subcommittee, which drafts changes. So now that we've finalised the recommendation for HS 2028, it was HS 2027, but pandemic, we are now immediately starting work for HS 2033. So now is the time we can take new proposals and new changes for the HS. And there's actually a booklet on our site called Guidance on How to Submit a Harmonised System Change Proposal, which guides you through how you can talk to your customs administrations and your governments or your IGOs to make proposals. So thank you, Caroline, and we look forward to continuing this good work.
Sorry, thank you very much, Gail, for a really excellent review of the work that you're doing, and also thank you also for your leadership on looking for ways and working with stakeholders, with governments, with the IGOs on ways to reform and amend the system, which, as you highlighted, is already extensive in how the range of plastics trade that is covered, but doesn't necessarily provide us all we need in terms of trade in hidden plastics and also the specificity that we may need for particular things that governments may wish to regulate and monitor at the border. So thank you very, very much for that presentation. I now turn to my colleague Simon to provide us a little bit of a snapshot of what we've heard so far and a little bit deeper on some of the plastics trade gaps. Yes, sure.
Thank you very much. I speak better with the legs stretched. Thank you very much for coming to this presentation and for your attention. So yes, in my presentation I will provide some brief remarks and summing up a bit of what has been said, and also provide some key takeaways so that could allow us to have a bit more of a broad understanding of what are the interlinkages between plastic pollution, transparency, and also the protection of the environment and health. So, as it has been already mentioned several times, trade in plastics is enormous. It is about $1 trillion in 2022 per year. And we see that this is a very important problem. However, as it has been highlighted before, also we have limited knowledge on the trade flows on certain plastic products. No, so here we have already heard about the plastics embedded in other products, but also about the plastic packaging now that is around the other products that are prepackaging plastics. So we have gaps in trade flows understandings, and this is important because it hampers the ability for governments to understand what actually is coming in their country and also develop their appropriate policies to address these inflows of plastics, and also to devise appropriate waste management capacities to this. So in addition to this, we have also some challenges with regards to understanding what are the cross-border flows in plastic packaging using the distribution and transportation of products, as well as a range of products that have been associated with plastic pollution more generally, such as single-use plastics, and also understanding what is the material composition of certain of the products or plastics that come into the border. So about the polymer types, but also about the chemical additives, and also, for example, whether a product is made out of virgin plastics or secondary plastics. So as I mentioned, transparency is very important because it allows policymakers to develop appropriate policies to address plastic pollution. So design and implement plastic pollution policies that protect the environment and health. And this is important, for example, when you want to regulate trade in plastic waste and facilitate the implementation of relevant international and domestic policies. So here we can think about, for example, the plastic waste amendments of the Basel Convention, but also to design domestic or also international policies to ban, restrict, or just regulate more broadly targeted materials or products that contribute to plastic pollution. And here we can think about single-use plastics, unnecessary packaging, products that contain certain chemicals that have been deemed harmful, as well as also, as Gael mentioned, to facilitate the enforcement by public authorities, particularly customs. Also, having better transparency about trade flows allows us to have effective and safe circular economy policies, and also support international efforts to improve international standards and also labeling requirements, and also have a better sense of what is the material composition, and also a better sense of the degree of presence of recycled plastics in products. Finally, this also allows us to have better transparency. Also allows us to have better understanding and better ways to promote trade in goods and services that can help to reduce plastic pollution. So here we can think about non-plastic substitutes, recyclable products, plastic waste management goods and services. Now, this has shown us. This is important because we can see now that there is actually an important element of international cooperation in order to improve transparency in trade flows of plastics. And here we can see, here in this slide, we can see some of the different initiatives that have taken place that are working on improving the transparency of plastics and plastic products and trade flow. Sorry. And I would just note that also at the INC on plastic pollution, many members have proposed inclusion of transparency and tracking, monitoring, labeling requirements to support control measures proposed for the treaty, and to support pathways to sustainable production and consumption of plastics. These proposals cover the full life cycle of plastics, including plastic products, chemicals of concern, and also plastic polymers as well. So here are some suggestions, recommendations on possible areas of priority to increase transparency in trade flows. So we see that it would be important to increase transparency around single-use plastics and other problematic plastic products in terms of their impact on the environment. We can also think about improving transparency around chemicals of concern and chemical additives using plastic that have been linked with associated impacts on the environment and health. We can also think about increasing the transparency on primary plastic polymers and their feedstock, and also have greater differentiation between the primary and secondary polymers. And furthermore, also have greater transparency about plastic waste linked with impact on the environment and health. We can also think about having, and that this has been mentioned before, about having greater transparency around the shares of plastics embedded in other products, as well as the plastic packaging that is surrounding products more generally. For this, it's important to also, as Gael noted, that the HS can do some, but cannot do everything. So it's important to also remember that. Here is just a quick table that provides you a quick assessment of why we would need further specificity in the HS codes. So here, when we try to look at different products that have been associated to be with plastic pollution, particularly with single-use plastics, for example, single-use plastic bags or cutlery, etc., we see that they do not have actually a dedicated HS code, which does not allow us to have a clear assessment and understanding of what is the actually value of trade flows, and also who are the main exporters, importers, etc. Here's a quick summary of some of the elements that have been discussed at the WCO. So in the current review cycle, so just quickly provide a brief assessment. So some of the elements that have been discussed is, for example, having better differentiation between bottled mineral waters depending on the capacity limit. So this is only about waters, but further it could be possibly extended to other types of beverages. Also, there have been discussions to include single-use subcategories for plastic products, and here we can think about, for example, drinking straws, bottles, single-use tableware, etc. Greater granularity for polymers for selected products. So here we are thinking about having better sense of what are the polymers that are composing, for example, drinking straws, boxes, tableware, fishing gear, for example, as well. And there has also been discussion about a definition for single-use products that could help also the work of the customs officials to implement this this type of amendments. So now, slide disappeared. Ah, no, sorry. Sorry. So here is just a few next steps maybe for improving transparency in trade flows of plastics. So first, we would suggest that it would be important to continue the adoption of proposals for amendments to the HS trade classification that can support plastic pollution efforts in this current cycle, but also in the future reuse cycles. Share experience and coordinate on domestic regional custom classifications that can improve trade-related data to support plastic pollution reduction efforts at the national and regional level. Furthermore, it would be important to empower custom officials to work with environment and trade officials, as well as with stakeholders, and to update trade classifications to support plastic pollution reduction efforts. We would also suggest to boost collaboration among environmental and trade ministries, engage in national policy making and international discussions on these topics. Finally, we would also suggest to keep up to date with the latest technologies and technical options that could facilitate the ability to monitor and regulate different types of plastic products and plastics more broadly at the border, and continue international cooperation on requirements and standards, common definitions, and labeling that can support transparency on trade flows. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon, for bringing together some of those takeaways and also for highlighting some of the issues that are currently under discussion in the HS context or proposed for discussion in the HS review context. So I'm now going to turn to our final speaker, Carla Valleclan, also from the BRS Secretariat, who's going to look at some of the experiences with the BRS in the BRS context in terms of technologies to facilitate compliance. And I would just say that we started about 5-10 minutes late because of the closing time of the plenary session beforehand. So I'm going to invite the panelists, if they have time, to stay for a few, no, maybe not for a few extra minutes. So Carla will have to be quick. We'll have a quick round of questions and then we'll turn to our two ambassadors to close at the end. Over to you, Carla.
Thank you very much, Caroline and colleagues here. Thank you also for coming, everybody. Yeah, I work for the Secretariats together with Melissa, and I'm trying to make sense of one of the pieces of work we do under the Basel Convention related to the previous panelists. So we agreed that I would highlight one of these lines of work that may contribute, and then we wish that contribute to the topics that we mentioned before about compliance, transparency, and traceability. So under this convention, the Basel Convention, which is one example of an MEA and also a legally binding instrument, we are looking into using technology or means to digitalize what we call the PIC procedure, which is the prior informed consent procedure for trade under this convention. And this convention follows the PIC procedure with 4 stages and requires several supporting documents, which can also be extended by each of the parties, which is simplified here in this slide to be very simple today. So a notification of those who want to export, the consents and issuance of the movement document. That's what we are calling the electronic approaches to the movement and notification documents. And then if consent is present, then we have the transboundary movement happening. And then finally, the disposal should be confirmed by the importing country. So additionally, this is very simplified here. Additionally, many players may be involved in that at the national level from the exporting country, also all the transit countries that may be involved in that, and finally, all those who are receiving the waste, in this case, at the importing country. So we have, when we talk about electronic approaches, we are talking about the electronic approach related to the convention, but actually several other actors, and not only those involved directly at the Ministry of Environment, which is usually the authority relating to the Basel Convention implementation, but all the other actors involved in trade, maybe trade of hazardous waste in this case, and other wastes, may be benefiting from this kind of approach.
So under the convention, we have what we call a working group approach, which means it's a very interesting and enriching experience normally, because we have representatives of all parties, or all those parties who may have the capacity to join this group. And we have one which was established in 2022 to work in this topic. And the group has over 50 representatives of different parties, representing all regions in the world, and several stakeholders, for example, private sector associations, again, who would also benefit from such an approach to the Basel Convention. And the work actually started several years ago, but it's moving in slow pace. We have hopes that it would advance a bit faster, but it takes time, as we have been hearing. Any kind of negotiations that involve many countries require time, and people need to reflect that in their legislations and also put the capacity into the resources into it. So here is not different. But we, through our work, we have confirmed that several parties already, and also other states which are not parties to the convention, have started work on this, which is good news for all of us. And many other observers, other stakeholders are also very interested. And this kind of confirms what we are saying, that is one piece of the big puzzle that we have been discussing here today in this panel, that people are interested in using technology to facilitate trade, specifically under this convention. So for those following the BRS COPs this week, there will be one agenda item under the Basel Convention on this topic, where we will be discussing the recommendations from this working group at the COP, and most likely, we hope, that we will continue the work and continue working, for example, on developing case studies that can be used to benchmark experiences, also pilot projects, and some technical recommendations on specifications, standards, and related information. I also would like to highlight what my previous colleagues also said, the importance of talking to each other. And we have been doing that under this work as well. So we are not starting from scratch and reinventing the wheel. So we have been learning and collaborating with different international organizations who have already started related work on this. For example, the UN CFACT work, which develops standards. So there is one specifically on waste covered by the Basel Convention. We also have been collaborating with WCO, the groups who are working on the data model and single window initiatives, and also with UNCTAD, for example, through the ASICUDA group, which is a software that you may be familiar with, those who know customs. And it's used in many countries in the world. And they also develop a similar approach for another MEA called CITES. So they have a solution called eCITES and the like. So we have been learning from all these colleagues in different international organizations and seeing what from previously done work can be used and useful for the Basel Convention. But additionally, besides all of this, I would say we can put on the table that the Basel Convention parties should also consider newer technologies or other technologies, and not only what has been done before, in order to help them in advancing with this work. For example, the work on digital passports is one of them, but also we could think about protocols for data exchange, or AI, or blockchain, and the like. So we'll see. So here, just to highlight what this work has to do with what we have been discussing here before. So we would like to highlight that the advances of digitalization of the PIC procedure under this convention is one piece of the puzzle that my colleagues have highlighted here before, that can facilitate trade, can increase transparency, and can allow for traceability of the transboundary movements controlled by this convention, enabling countries or parties and other stakeholders to understand what's moving around more precisely, also having data and aggregation of data to understand what's going well and what's not, and where there are gaps that we have to improve. And this, in general, can facilitate not only the trade of plastic and plastic waste, but also all the other waste covered by the convention. So additionally, we think that the control procedure can become more efficient under the convention, and information will be made available faster for all the stakeholders involved in this process. While nowadays we know that many parties still use paper, other parties use email, which you can call it that electronically as well, but it's still a very basic way of organizing information. While here we are talking about software systems that each country and each stakeholder would be using, web-based or not web-based, talking to customs systems as well. And we also would benefit from all the work that my colleagues have highlighted before, for example, on the applicable use of codes. The HTS codes is one group of examples, but also other codes such as the OECD codes, the Basel Convention codes, and national codes. And this may sound simple, but in practice is not. That's what parties tell me, that sometimes it's difficult to understand which codes to use, which code not to use, which codes to use. And maybe I'm an exporting country, I define things according to my legislation, but maybe the other countries involved also need other things. And having all of these systems talking to each other, systems of different countries talking to each other, using the right codes may help. Will not solve all the problems that we have highlighting here, but may help also in the big puzzle we're dealing with. And finally, no, we should not forget that the biggest potential is actually to improve the effectiveness of the environment control, which is the objective of the convention. So final, such a work allows also for stronger and efficient collaboration among the stakeholders at the national and the global levels. And I would like to thank you with that. And I'm open here for questions here today, but also if the parties attending here, I have seen several familiar faces. If you want to join this group, we would appreciate. And thank you very much, Caroline, for inviting us again.
Thank you very much, Carla. Really, really helpful to hear more on your insights on how there are also some technological options here. I mean, I think Gail has made clear that there's things the HS system can do to promote transparency, but not all of the elements. And the idea of integrating some of these different systems technologically seems very logical. I don't know how hard it is, but certainly a step worth advancing towards. And I'm sure if we had colleagues who are working on standards and labeling here, they would also highlight the role that this could play if you had more international cooperation around those to facilitate the review by customs officials at the border as well. So it seems to me that we need a multifaceted approach to this, and your presentations have really underlined that. So look, we have just about 7 minutes, 7 minutes for questions. So I'm going to take 2. If anyone would like to raise their hand and have any questions for the speakers, yes, please. If you could start with your name and affiliation.
Sure. Jim Puckett,
I don't think it's working. Yeah, it's not working.
Puckett.
Oh,
it is now.
Okay.
Voilà.
Jim Puckett, the Basel Action Network. So I've looked a little bit into the World Customs Organization treaty, the HS treaty, and it doesn't look like you have any enforcement capacity. What we're seeing in the field right now, I'm really looking deeply into the United States exports of electronic waste. And they're not using the HS codes for electronic waste. They're using commodity codes for plastics and metals. And we're certain that these are misdeclarations because we watched these containers being loaded and we photographed it. So misdeclarations happen, and then we look at the plastic side and we go, wow, it's actually happening there too. And it's actually, we believe, affecting the data. The Comtrade data, we're starting to see it come down from the United States a little bit on plastics. No other reason except we believe misdeclarations. So one of the main reasons for existing is to have accurate data, to help enforcers, etc. But you don't have that capacity. What can you do when you observe these type of things, or we can bring your attention to these type of things? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jim. Any other questions? I don't see any, so I'm going to turn to Gail. It's a great question from Jim.
Okay, you're quite right. So, thank you. Okay, you're quite right. The HS is not about enforcement.
You may need it closer.
Okay. That better? Okay, you're quite right. The HS is not about enforcement. The HS is about the classification of legitimate trade. So we have 2 sides to customs. Well, we have multiple sides. We actually have more than that. But we have the revenue side, which is dealing with legitimate trade, and we have the enforcement side, which is dealing with illegal trade. So when we talk about the trade statistics captured by the HS, we're only talking about legal trade, of course. That's the first thing. Because if you're smuggling something, if you're bringing something you're not meant to, you don't generally classify it correctly. Now, in terms of misclassifications, this is a huge problem. And as I think I had on one of the slides, but I didn't really get into it because of time. To make the HS work, you've got to have good systems to pick up misclassifications. So you have to have well-functioning, well-resourced customs. And what you can do when you see those misclassifications is you can alert your customs officials, both in the importing country and the exporting country. So if you're seeing it exported, tell the exporting customs. If you know where it's going, tell the importing customs, because it is an offence to misclassify goods. In every country in the world, if you misclassify your goods, that's an illegal act. So we have got the powers to inspect those containers. We've got the powers to take action against those importers and exporters. So yes, it does happen. Yes, it's a huge problem. And what you can do to help us is tell us whenever you see it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gail. It also perhaps indicates the need for greater awareness about the misclassification. Go ahead.
Just going to say that we also conduct operations. So we have, for example, like Operation Demeter is for Montreal Protocol, but we have other plastic waste international multi-country operations that we do. We also work with regions like at the moment the Asia Pacific Plastic Waste Project. So there's also other ways too that you can get involved as IGOs or as countries rather than private sector and individuals. There's also other things you can do with us to help improve enforcement.
I'm also, sorry, thank you very much, Gail. I'm also aware, Jim, of the work that you're doing also to try and elevate recognition of these issues in the Basel Convention context. I'm sure it will happen in other plastics trade issues as well, that those who wish to evade regulation will find ways to do so. So it will be a recurring issue for attention, I think. So thank you very much for that discussion. I'm sure it can continue elsewhere. I'm now going to firstly just thank all of the panelists for their contributions today. Super insightful and detailed. I hope those online and here today have found it very useful. You sort of have a star cast of international experts on this. But to close, I'm going to turn back to each of our co-hosts, the ambassadors from Barbados and Ecuador, to close. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this really excellent panel. And Simon in particular, because I knew you when you were an intern. It's so good to see you up here speaking with such authority. It really, really is. Very little to add, except that it really has reaffirmed the importance of transparency, of data, of statistics and analysis. That time is necessary to change some legal elements like in the harmonized code, and drilling down on composition rather than just descriptions is important. This can be complex, but that looking at greater specificity gives us more accuracy and transparency and gives the signal that these goods are important, as Gail said. But it also provides a very good pathway to the creation of policy. But it's also clear that time is not on our side as it relates to the impact of plastics waste, so we need to get on with the business at hand. This means political agreement on scope, needs enforceability, including the buy-in of customs at the border, and we look forward to the recommendations in January. We're also making a lot of good progress on transparency of the full plastics value chain, but more to go if we want to really regulate and design policies to restrict or regulate. The international cooperation around improving transparency of the flow of plastic products is improving, but we need to focus on single-use plastics, chemicals of concern, and plastics embedded in products, although we heard that it has its challenges. But when we see the sample of products that use single-use plastics that do not have HS codes, it shows why it is so difficult to follow the plastic. But we were also informed of how trade facilitation and digitalization under the PIC can improve traceability. And at the macro level, it's clear that more collaboration between trade, environment, and customs officials is needed at the national and global level. Ambassador Valencia, over to you, please.
Oh, thank you, Ambassador Wilson. Just a few words. We are almost ending our conversation for as of today. Just want to add something else. I believe I would like to refer to one very, I believe, strategic word that Carla said. We have a puzzle, in front of us. And this is a puzzle that we are all compelled to complete, to do our best in order to solve it together. It's necessary because we have, one hand, the need of doing something about plastic pollution, on tackling this problem from different directions, being effective about that, and at the same time, different tools that are there, customs tools, that the ones that are referred by the BRS Convention, etc., that need to be put together. And certainly, to add to those some new ideas, some new initiatives, some new work to be effective and to implement it in a real way, to give that jump from having them written and to have it implemented and have it in place and working for the last goals or for the final goals that we are searching in our endeavors. So I just want to say that and to thank you so much to everybody that has been here present, of course, certainly, but the contributions that we have received from the WTO Secretariat have been great also. Always they are great supporters of our work at the DPP. DPP is having a new work in the following weeks. We have a plenary in May. And then we have workshops with regard to some regions, Latin America and the Caribbean, or common region. Matthew is one of those regions that we cover under one of those workshops. And certainly it also reflects the importance of Geneva in the whole process. Geneva is a center not just to have ideas, but it's a center for conversation, productive conversation, of reaching understandings and working together towards that common, aspiration of all of us. In fact, the next INC meeting will take place here in Geneva, and we all, from different, quarters, look forward to do something about that and to hopefully to have a great outcome, a final outcome, so to say, out of that INC meeting. So thank you so much for this, Caroline. TESS is great. Your work is here, always recognized. That we really are very thankful about the work of you and your colleagues. Thanks a lot.